got to hear about impact as a project brought up by our course leader as a potential live brief that we could work on during a major project.
I decided to get involved because it sounded like something really different, and the chance to work with clients.
And I thought it sounded like quite a harsh subject matter, and the challenge of that grabbed my attention.
And I thought it was a really interesting subject to work on.
The one bit of the research that really spoke to me
was how a majority of the brain injuries were caused by shrapnel and explosives of the time, and they mentioned about the grenades being quite a revolutionary weapon for World War I.
It was really interesting in terms of the chain of evacuation that the soldiers went through from the battlefield into hospitals. It was just such a long, drawn-out process to get back home, and just what they went through was really intriguing.
And for me, it was working out how to visually represent the two different elements of the project, which is World War I and head injuries.
His speech is peculiar to himself, words coming from him with a splutter continuously at irregular, rapid intervals, like a splutter of a machine gun, with handle turned at moderate speed. This rapid fire of speech he keeps up for hours, full of threats, exclamations, and unrefined abuse. And it's quite a visceral quote that I feel if you were to see on a bus, it would really drive you to want to find out more about the project.
So as for any project I start in my sketchbook with lots of sketches, I wanted to get across the idea of vulnerability and the idea of fragmentation. So I looked at lots of reference photos from World War I, such as the soldiers, what they were wearing, trenches, explosions, playing around with shadows and lighting, creating a small image of a profile of a soldier, and then having smaller figures looking like they were piecing back together the brain that had been kind of destroyed on the floor. So then I went into the photography studio and placed that around, and then played around with the lighting, put some paper wire in, and kind of had the figures climbing a ladder and putting the pieces of research in to kind of represent the research that Headway had done, and putting together these ideas that they'd researched.
I don't want to start out with just one option, so I did a lot of thumbnails with a lot of ideas surrounding it, and starts to narrowing it down. So we ended up with two final results, one with the idea of the trench being inside the brain, that was going to be a 3D model, and the other is the hail of bullets going through the soldier, that was going to be the quote. And the client group decided to go with the second one, and are these here. So I made the original painting with watercolor and then superimpose the quote on top digitally.
I looked at combining the imagery of a head, a brain and a trench, and this was my initial sketch showing a head with a crater for the brain and a trench in the shape of a head. I did a lot of research into what trenches looked like from above to help inform my final image, and then I finally moved on to making it as a 3D model, and these are some of the sections from that. So I had the burnt out trees and the smoking explosions, the soldiers and the ladders in the trenches. And then moving on to the final image, which is this, and I photographed it with photographic lighting to create all the nice shadows and contrast. Yeah.
I just filtered through the information that we were provided in the research and picked out bits and pieces that potentially gave me an idea, or I thought had potential to create interesting imagery from. And then from there, I just started to thumbnail and develop my thumbnails into roughs. And any idea I had, I'd just get straight out of my head onto paper in thumbnails. And that was where I began to get the idea for the grenade reflecting the brain, but also being a visual metaphor for the brain injuries too. And then I'd push that thumbnail into the rough stage, and then push that into refined imagery before moving on to putting together the final outcomes of the image, which I make using stencils in my sketchbook. I use any materials I can get hold of, all to create interesting textures and give my work more of a tactile and messy feel to try and fit the World War I kind of theme.
What I've enjoyed most about the experience is the challenging aspect of it.
The concepts and trying to communicate what they had researched in a kind of simplistic way.
I've also enjoyed working in a group with the other students.
Working with the clients too and getting their feedback on each of our meetings.
And I've come away with it with just a lot more information about World War I itself that I did not know before.